Well, good morning. This is a great crowd, and I thought I was speaking to 300, but a lot of folks registered last week, so I think I'm speaking to over 500. So I'm not nervous. Really welcome everybody here. So good morning. My name is Lee Worsley, and I'm the Executive Director of the Triangle J Council of Governments. We're the lead regional organization representing a seven-county region here in the Triangle. We work for and represent 43 local governments, and I have the privilege of working with some very urban communities and some very rural communities. My largest local governments are local governments like Raleigh, Durham, Wake County, and Durham County. But I also serve small municipalities like Cameron and Moore County with only about 400 residents, and Micro with about 500 residents in Johnston County. As a council of governments, I represent the only governmental mechanism in North Carolina which is a local government under state law. It also spans a regional landscape. As such, your COGs across the state represent entities that can provide a variety of services and encourage and implement shared service, collaborative planning, and regional thinking. I'd like to spend a few minutes talking with you about two intersecting ideas being discussed today at the forum, that of growth and boundaries, and maybe get you thinking about how boundaries might influence how our state grows and how we approach important topics like urban and rural connections. My purpose this morning is not to interpret the data I'm about to present or to discuss my interest in the topic, rather to give you some things to think about as you enter today's discussion, and to challenge you to think about whether the way you define boundaries and think about growth may in some way influence how you think and talk about urban and rural issues. I'm going to do most of this with a series of maps and graphs on which I've deliberately left off any substantial labels just to get you thinking. So a little bit about me. I think my mom's watching on UNC TV. Hi, Mom. She'll appreciate the picture. A couple of the pictures. But, and I think many of us have this same story, right? My own journey's been a wonderful mixture of urban and rural influence which have shaped my love for this state, and specifically for me, the Triangle region. My passion for public service and my appreciation for the value, connectedness, and interdependence that our urban and rural communities have throughout North Carolina have been solidified through my personal and professional experiences in both urban and rural parts of the state. I grew up in Raleigh, but I also have roots in rural eastern North Carolina. See, my grandparents were tobacco farmers in Edgecombe County. Somebody was yelling for Edgecombe County earlier today. And yes, that's me in the upper left hand portion of the picture at my granddaddy's farm on my John Deere pedal tractor. So some of you laugh. Some of you that are familiar with farm equipment know that my granddaddy had a loyalty to John Deere, much like NASCAR fans have loyalties to Ford, Chevy, or Toyota, right? Nothing but green. I learned a lot from my granddaddy during those weekends on the farm. I also had wonderful experiences here in Raleigh growing up. In fact, I attended elementary school just a few blocks from where we're sitting today at Lucille Hunter Elementary School, which is pictured on the bottom left. It's a wonderful school with a lot of history, and I was very lucky to be able to attend that school. The mixture of rural and urban influences continued as I've progressed through my professional career. I've been the county manager in one of the state's smallest and most rural communities, Greene County, and a deputy manager and interim county manager in one of North Carolina's most urban communities, Durham County. I learned so much from both places, and they were both terrific places to work and live. I've seen firsthand how both Greene County and Durham County both contribute positively to North Carolina's economic and cultural image. I steadfastly believe that North Carolina would not be in a leadership position in many national rankings and ratings if our mixture of unbelievable rural and urban communities were not part of our state. Of course, my feeling is partly opinion, but I think my own experience and perceptions are instructive. Absent the data I'm about to show you, our perception and our attitude about our urban and rural challenges can impact our approach to rural and urban issues in a positive way or a negative way, based on how we perceive and approach those issues. I hope some of the data I'll present and will help paint a picture that our urban and rural communities, while certainly different, benefit from each other's successes and also are impacted when negative things occur. So let me start with growth to build context. The state demographer released the 2017 population estimates last September. In 2015, the state added its 10 millionth resident. About 300 people are added to the state's population each day. We've added nearly 1 million people since 2000 and are projected to add another 3 million over the next 20 years. I think most people would say it was wise for us to prepare for the state we are today back at the turn of the century, and it makes sense that we ought to be preparing today for the North Carolina we will become. That's why these collaborative discussions are so important. We all know the possibilities and challenges that continued growth will bring to our entire state. The North Carolina Rural Center groups counties into 3 buckets. You heard about this earlier: urban, suburban, and rural. Historically, the Rural Center only classified counties as urban or rural, but in 2015 they expanded their classification to include suburban. This move represents a recognition that North Carolina is no longer simply a rural or urban state. As seen in these charts, rural counties, 80 with population densities of 250 people per square mile or less, will account for a lesser share of the population through 2038. Urban counties, 6 counties with population densities between 750 and 1,933 people per square mile, will account for the largest share of North Carolina's population by 2038. Regional cities or suburban counties, the 14 counties with population densities between 250 and 750 per square mile, will remain steady at 25% of the state's population. Of course, this story of growth is no surprise, at least when viewed for the state as a whole. It's been a defining characteristic of the state for decades. But over the past few decades, the growth has been largely metropolitan growth, focused on the urban and adjacent rural counties in our metropolitan regions. So let's now turn from growth to another theme that influences the rural and urban discussion: boundaries. If you take nothing else away from the maps I'm about to share with you, I hope you'll start thinking about the boundaries you work within, why they are there, and what they really mean. Since some boundaries are natural, like my friend Minnesota mentioned this morning, like the 3 geologic regions in North Carolina: the mountains, the Piedmont, and the coast. This map shows them by county groupings, but the facts on the ground don't actually follow county lines. Another example of natural boundaries are water basins, of which we are reminded so forcefully every so often as our state is subjected to severe flooding events. Again, our water basins don't really pay attention to our municipal and county boundaries. I know my county and municipal friends can agree with that. So here's that same map zoomed into the central part of the state. Zooming in highlights that watersheds, like many natural resources, again, don't neatly line up with other boundaries that we're bound by. Another type of boundary is economic, defining relationships between places. An example is metropolitan statistical areas, defined by the Census Bureau primarily around central cities and surrounding counties with significant commuting flows. The state has 11 combined statistical areas, which are closely aligned with the MSAs, and an additional 17 MSAs, ranging in population from 2.3 million to 124,000. Fully, 84% of our state's population lives in an MSA. But most of the boundaries we actually deal with are neither natural nor economic. They are institutional. For example, the municipal and county boundaries shown here. North Carolina has 100 counties, some with as few as 4,000 people, and 552 municipalities. Used well, institutional boundaries help us make decisions more efficiently and connect citizens to decision makers in meaningful ways. But used poorly, boundaries become barriers to effective decisions or efficient service delivery that could benefit our people and businesses, since we rarely live our lives or run our businesses according to jurisdictional lines. In some cases, some may argue that institutional boundaries weren't designed with efficiency and effectiveness uppermost in mind. Our U.S. congressional districts are another layer of institutional boundaries. And here are the House districts for North Carolina and the state Senate districts. Looking at all these districts, it's sometimes hard to see how they're best aligned to tackle the challenges we know that are top of mind with our citizens and businesses, whether that be economic development, mobility, emergency response, education and training, water resources, or the needs of an aging population. Even when boundaries have some degree of logic, as with our Council of Government regions, not that I'm biased at all, shown here, there is no single set of institutional lines that is best for all occasions, and unfortunately, none of us have been effective in making sure institutional lines align with each other as lines are created. For example, zooming in on the central part of our state, many of our economic regions grew up along the North Carolina Railroad, shown here in red. But since trains don't do well on hills, railroad tracks tend to follow ridge lines whenever they can. And of course, ridge lines are the boundaries between watersheds. The centers of our economic regions become the edges of the watershed-based regions. The key then is to be able to work across institutional boundaries. And that is what regional councils, made up of urban, suburban, and rural places, and already having statutory authority to perform municipal and county functions, can excel at when they're utilized effectively by our local government members in the state. And we have a lot of institutional boundaries that often don't align with one another, even when they address the same topic. In transportation, our planning organizations, or the MPOs and the RPOs, don't necessarily align with our NCDOT divisions. In economic development, our U.S. Economic Development Administration economic development districts don't match the state prosperity zones, which aren't the same as the regional economic partnerships, which don't match the workforce development boards. Catching on to a theme. But let me end by giving a few examples of boundaries that aren't natural or economic or institutional, but that perhaps restrict our thinking. Let's call this fourth type of boundary a perception boundary. A narrative you've probably heard, because there is some truth to it, is about well-off urban North Carolina and poor rural North Carolina. And our eyes seem to confirm this narrative, with cranes erecting new buildings in our cities and with many small towns and rural places seeming stagnant. But I think it's important to change our thinking a little bit, because places aren't poor, people are. And the growth in population in our urban counties has included growth in the number of poor people. In Durham and Wake counties alone, there are over 141,000 people living in poverty, more than the number of poor people in a combined 23 counties in eastern North Carolina. The same story is repeated in our other large metro regions in North Carolina, such as Mecklenburg County and a combined 17 counties in western North Carolina. This map may say lots of things to you. To me, it confirms our significant challenge of poverty in the state. Despite our amazing economic prosperity over the last few decades, it also highlights that this is a statewide issue, not just a rural issue or an urban issue. The urban areas of Durham, Wake, and Mecklenburg counties have a lower percentage of their population considered to be in poverty than 40 rural counties combined. Although the number of poor people in urban counties is higher, the percent of people in poverty is higher in rural counties. So addressing poverty is a challenge in both rural and urban places, suggesting the need for a strong and creative state-led role to address the different needs in different places. This slide might take a minute to absorb, but I don't have a minute to stay on it. But urban and suburban counties account for 76% of the state's population that are considered to be in poverty. However, those counties also account for 75% of the population considered not to be in poverty. A similar mixed view is obtained when we look at people without health insurance. The urban areas of Durham, Wake, and Mecklenburg counties have higher numbers of their population that are uninsured than 40 rural counties combined. However, urban and rural areas experience a similar rate of people without health insurance, around 10 to 13%. Using the North Carolina Rural Center's criteria, rural counties in the state account for the highest rate of those with and without insurance, with urban and suburban counties trailing closely behind. However, this is likely due to the large number of people who reside in urban areas. Across North Carolina, there's a shortage of rental homes affordable and available to extremely low-income households whose incomes are at or below the poverty guideline of 30% of their median income. Many of these households are severely cost-burdened, spending more than half of their income on housing. Similarly, these urban counties have a higher percentage of cost-burdened households when compared to these same rural counties. Of note, these percentages account for only low and moderate income households. It's important to note that looking only at cost-burdened housing does not provide a complete picture, as many people commute long distances from their jobs because they can't afford to live near where they work. A household is considered housing and transportation cost burden if they pay more than 45% of their income on those expenses. For households that are low to moderate income, they have even less disposable income to spend on other needs. In more rural communities, the population may not be spending as much on housing, but when comparing housing and transportation costs combined, communities are more comparably cost burdened because of the high transportation costs in more rural communities for various reasons. The most noticeable urban-rural divide occurs in North Carolina's educational attainment for the 25 and over population. So in closing, with a view of the region I know best, the Triangle region, I hope that we will leave here today and will continue to work on these things. Better understanding of the natural and economic boundaries that frame the issues we care about, how we can work across institutional boundaries to best address those issues, and how we can be mindful of perception boundaries that might keep us from recognizing hidden truths and finding the best solution for all our citizens. But most of all, I appreciate you all spending the day with me and with all of us to begin that discussion and to begin seeing how rural and urban communities are really connected and how we need each other in order to succeed. Thank you.